Chapter 131. Alistair's stress test began not with a bang, but with a cascade of perfectly timed inconveniences that bled into outright sabotage. It was a masterclass in applied chaos theory. Their bank accounts were temporarily frozen due to suspicious activity. Their guild's official registration was flagged for a random and endlessly protracted audit. A shipment of their standard ammunition was misrouted and delivered to a rival guild. Jax's favorite cafe, the one he visited every morning, mysteriously burned down. Each event was minor, explainable, and utterly deniable. But together, they formed a pattern of escalating pressure, designed to fray their nerves, drain their resources, and isolate them. He's testing our logistics and morale. Silas grumbled, staring at a sheaf of legal documents from the association. He's seeing how we handle systemic friction. Kaelen's reflective insights saw the deeper pattern. It's more than that. He's gathering data on our decision-making processes. Who handles finances? Who deals with bureaucracy? How do we adapt? He's building a profile. They were lab rats in a maze, and every wrong turn was being meticulously recorded. Chapter 132. The next phase was more direct. During a routine C-rank patrol in the sewers, a job they'd taken for quick, easy cash, the environment itself turned against them. The tunnel layouts, which Jax had mapped himself the day before, were wrong. Manolite fixtures shorted out at critical moments. A sluice gate, marked as manual on the blueprints, was suddenly automated and tried to crush Rorik. The phantoms they encountered were standard corpse rats, but they moved with uncanny, predictive coordination, always flanking, always targeting their blind spots. It was as if the dungeon itself had learned their tactics. He's hacked the public system for this area. Dorian reported over the comms, his voice tense. He's subtly altering the environmental data and feeding the Phantom's predictive algorithms based on your past mission records. He's turning the system itself into a weapon. They fought their way out, but it was a close, messy affair. They were no longer fighting monsters. They were fighting an intelligent, malicious environment. The message was clear. Nowhere was safe. The very tools they relied on could be turned against them. Chapter 133. The psychological warfare intensified. Lyra began receiving anonymous, untraceable messages containing detailed accounts of her past failures, missions that were classified, losses she had buried deep. Jax found childhood photos on his private terminal, photos he was sure he had lost years ago, with certain faces subtly blurred out. Silas was sent a single, dried flower, the same type he had placed on his predecessor's grave. Alistair wasn't just attacking their present. He was weaponizing their past, reminding them of their regrets and vulnerabilities. The most chilling was what happened to Kaelen. He didn't receive a message or a memento. He simply started having hyper-realistic flashes of a different life. A moment of feeling perfectly healthy. The ghost of a mother's touch. The taste of a meal he'd never eaten. They were echoes of the life he'd never had. The one Alara had offered him. Alistair was replaying the Sovereign of Reflection's greatest trick, but with surgical precision, targeting the core of Kaelen's identity. His lost normality. It was a constant, low-grade assault on their sanity. The safe house felt less like a sanctuary and more like a cage under a microscope. Chapter 134. We can't just endure this. Lyra finally snapped, slamming her hand on the table. Her usual cool composure was cracked. Her eyes shadowed. He's dissecting us alive. We need to hit back. How? Jax asked, his usual humor gone. We don't know where he is. He's not a thing in a place. He's a process. He's a consciousness operating through proxies and data streams. Kaelen said, his voice weary but focused. We can't punch a concept, but we can corrupt his data. He looked at Dorian. The spoofing device. We used it to send him false data about a glitch. What if we used it to send him a virus? Dorian's eyes lit up. A logical paradox. Feed his own analytical mind a problem it can't solve. A cognitive bomb. The liar's paradox. Kaelen suggested. This statement is false. Too simple. His mind would discard it as noise. Dorian countered. We need something tailored. A paradox based on his own existence. An observation that, if true, proves it cannot be observed. They began to design a weapon made not of mana, but of pure, self-referential logic. A thought virus meant to crash the system of a god. Chapter 135. Creating the paradox was one thing. Delivering it was another. They needed a vector, a way to force-feed it into Alistair's perception. They realized the answer was Leo. The blank-faced man was still a terminal. Even if Alistair had wiped the hard drive, the connection was likely still active, just dormant. Their new mission: get Kaelen physically close to Leo so he could use his reflective insight not to read, but to *Rgstar, to imprint the paradox directly onto the psychic connection. It was the riskiest plan they had ever conceived. It meant walking directly into a trap Alistair would be expecting. They disguised it as a desperate move. Silas loudly arranged a safe meeting with an association contact to clear their name. Using a code he knew would be intercepted. It was bait. They moved Leo to a secure medical facility under the guise of association care. The facility, of course, was one Alistair could easily monitor. The stage was set for a confrontation they were not meant to win. Their only chance was to lose in the right way. Chapter 136. The medical facility was a tomb of white walls and silent, beeping machines. Leo lay in a bed, his eyes open and empty. Kaelen stood over him, pretending to be a specialist consultant. He didn't have to wait long. The air in the room grew cold. The lights flickered. Alistair materialized from the shadows in the corner, his form coalescing out of the gloom. He held his book, a smirk on his face. Predictable. Alistair said. The stressed variable returns to the site of the contamination, seeking to understand or reverse the process. A classic behavioral response. Kaelen turned to face him, his heart a drum in his chest. You're torturing an innocent man. Innocent is a subjective term. He was a tool that broke. I have replaced him. Alistair gestured vaguely. You, however, are a far more durable tool. The data you've provided on adaptive resilience under pressure is invaluable. This ends now, Kaelen said, summoning the Warden's blade. The void edge appeared in his hand, drinking the sterile light. Alistair didn't even flinch. A physical threat? How disappointingly mundane. He made a note in his book. Hypothesis. Variable resorts to base aggression when logical options are exhausted. Confirmed. This was the plan. Keep him talking. Keep him observing. Let him think he was in control. Chapter 137. Kaelen lunged. The fight was a farce. Alistair didn't block or dodge in a physical sense. He simply edited the space between them. A wall of solidified air appeared. The floor turned to frictionless ice. Kaelen's own momentum was used against him, sending him crashing into medical equipment. It was like fighting a ghost who controlled the very laws of the arena. You see, Alistair said, calmly stepping around a toppled four-stand. You cannot win a game where I write the rules. Your only purpose is to provide data until you break. Then, I will dissect your core and learn how it ticks. Kaelen pushed himself up, feigning desperation. He channeled power, making a show of trying to assert his domain. The grey stone flickered weakly, barely covering a few feet before sputtering out. Core integrity depleted from stress. Alistair noted aloud. Fascinating. The emotional state directly impacts power output. He was so focused on Kaelen, so confident in his control, that he failed to notice the true attack. While Kaelen performed his desperate struggle, he had placed a hand on Leo's forehead. Through the physical contact, his reflective insight dove deep. Not to read, but to project. He imprinted the carefully crafted paradox not as words, but as a pure, self-destructive concept, directly into the dormant psychic link. The paradox was, the act of observing this data stream proves the observer does not exist. It was a logical spike aimed directly at Alistair's core programming. Chapter 138. For a moment, nothing happened. Alistair continued his monologue, detailing Kaelen's declining performance metrics. Then he stopped mid-sentence. His head twitched. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. Error. Sensory feed. Recursive loop detected. He looked at his book, then at his hands, a frown deepening. I am observing an anomaly in my own observational data. That is, illogical. Kaelen watched, holding his breath. The virus was replicating. Primary hypothesis. Compromised. Alistair muttered, his voice losing its smooth cadence. If I am observing the anomaly, then who is observing me? The premise of a solitary observer is flawed. The data is self-negating. He began to flicker, his form becoming unstable. The room's lights strobed violently. The paradox was doing its work, attacking the foundational belief of his existence, that he was the sole, objective observer. You introduced a contradiction. Alistair gasped, clutching his head. His eyes were wide with a new, raw emotion. Fear, not of death, but of epistemological collapse. You broke the experiment. He wasn't being destroyed. He was being *unmade star. His consciousness, built on a framework of pure logic, was crumbling under the weight of a paradox it could not resolve. Chapter 139. With a final, silent scream that was more a distortion of reality than a sound, Alistair's form imploded. There was no light, no explosion. He simply folded in on himself and vanished, his book dropping to the floor with a dull thud. The oppressive, intelligent pressure in the room vanished. The lights stabilized. The room was just a room again. Kaelen stood panting, the warden's blade fading from his hand. He looked at Leo. The man's eyes were still empty. On the floor, Alistair's book lay open. The pages were blank. They had won. They had defeated a sovereign not with power, but with a thought. Silas, Lyra, and Jax burst into the room, weapons drawn. Is it over? Jax asked, looking around. For now. Kaelen said, picking up the blank book. It felt inert. We didn't kill him. I think. We forced a system crash. He might reboot, or parts of him might still be out there. But the central consciousness, the Alistair we knew, is gone. It was a victory, but a hollow one. They had been forced to use a weapon of horrific abstraction. They had to become as cold and calculating as their enemy to survive. Chapter 140. In the aftermath, the stress test ceased. The bureaucratic blocks vanished. The strange accident stopped. The world returned to a semblance of normal. But the Obsidian Star Guild was changed. The constant psychological warfare had left scars. They were jumpier, more paranoid, quicker to see patterns and threats where there might be none. Kaelen held the blank book. It was a trophy from a war of ideas. He had used the power of a warden in a way he never imagined. Not to impose order on chaos, but to impose a chaos of logic on order itself. He had learned a terrible lesson. To fight monsters that were concepts, you had to become a conceptual fighter. The Ashen Crow had plucked the feathers of the observer. But as he looked out at the city, he knew the sky was still full of other, stranger birds. The curator was still waiting. The association was still hunting. And somewhere in the void, the anomaly continued its slow, patient consumption. He closed his hand around the blank book. The war was not over. It had simply upgraded its operating system.